Welcome everyone, this is On Just Restart. I am joined by my friend Brandon, and today we're going to be talking about The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom and the true meaning of its title. I feel like there's kind of a lot here that we can sort of extrapolate. I feel like there's a lot of theories we've talked about in the past that kind of hold some weight here, and we'll be bringing that up here, but ultimately it's kind of theorizing and speculating what this title means for this game. What does Tears of the Kingdom mean? So before I jump into anything, Brandon, before I even let you talk, I need to specify something here, because I think there's been a little bit of discussion and debate here, and there have been articles that have since come out because Eurogamer, I believe, reached out to Nintendo, and it's been clarified. The word tears is tears and not tears, okay?
Yes.
And I understand some people were debating maybe it's tears because the kingdom is kind of in pieces, so tears of the kingdom, but it's actually tears. So in case there's any debate, that's what it is. Is it possible that maybe they chose that wording because they wanted to have multiple meanings? Certainly possible, but the intended clear-cut meaning or word is tears and not tears. Right.
So that only works in English. It doesn't work in other languages. Like the Japanese word, it does not mean tear in any way. So it would only work in the English title.
That's I didn't even really think about that. I don't know on that at all. But with that all said, Brandon, you know, when you hear or see the title Tears of the Kingdom, what do you think?
My immediate reaction was, is this as spoilery as Nintendo made us seem to think?
Because for such a long time, we were like, oh man, the reason why they're not really telling us the title, because it's a big spoiler. And I had a feeling, but you know, when we just didn't have that much information, we kind of pulled at anything, right? And it really, to me, just feels like that was just standard PR talk. They needed to say that.
Probably.
You know, and when they said it, it did give us something to be excited about. Like, ooh, the title is spoilery. Okay, what does that mean exactly? I do believe that the title does tell us a lot about the story, and we'll be getting to that in this discussion. But on the surface, I think a lot of people don't really know what it necessarily means.
Right. They didn't really give us the full context of what the name really means. I feel like when we know everything about the game, it's gonna be an kind of, okay, that makes sense. Kind of an aha moment. Yeah. But that's exactly what we're here to speculate about.
Yeah, for sure. So, you know, I have some thoughts in mind already, but I want to kind of give you the floor first to kind of tell me what you sort of make of the title and what it represents.
Right. My kind of base thoughts were that it was referencing some kind of ancient kingdom of the Zonai, because we saw that mural and we saw a reference to what we think is Zonai, which who even knows at this point if that is a Zonai? That's just what everybody seems to be so dead set about this. It would be hilarious if Nintendo came out like, nope, that's somebody else. But for now, we'll assume that is the Zonai. So I kind of assumed it was something in reference to like an ancient Zonai kingdom that fell to ruin.
Sure, but let's speak on that part, the whole Zonai question.
Yeah.
So we know the Zonai exists. This isn't like some sort of random theory that we just came up with as Zelda fans. Like, the Zonai are actually a known culture that is no longer around in Breath of the Wild. This is actual lore for Breath of the Wild.
As referenced by, say, the barbarian armor.
The barbarian armor. There are different ruins littered all throughout Hyrule that aren't really. If it's not, whenever you see
mazes,
the labyrinths, exactly.
Yes.
Whenever you see those giant like totem poles, all the stuff in not really. I guess they're technically not totem poles, but there are like these giant statues of different beasts all throughout the world, especially in those woods over there. And a lot of them are depicting dragons. So the reason we've really bought into this idea that it's a Zonai is because there is this ancient civilization of Zonai that we see all these ruins all throughout Hyrule. They're not really they're just there. We don't know like what the significance of them are, and they're just gone mysteriously, right? There's like mystery there with no real answer in Breath of the Wild. But when we take a look at the first trailer, because we basically have three trailers, and there's like a small little snippet as well.
Yeah.
You could count as the third trailer. But the actual first trailer, in there we see Link and Zelda exploring some sort of tomb or ruin that is clearly, I think it's underground, but it's definitely in a dark cave-like place, right? And we see an opening, and we see like what appeared to be like the kind of like dragon head-like statue, something to that effect. And it's very reminiscent of all the Zonai ruins we saw throughout Breath of the Wild. So this leads people to believe, okay, maybe these are Zonai ruins, and there's other things throughout the explorations in this like giant tomb-like place in the trailer that also seem to match up with the Zonai. And then you also see like these colored luminous stones as well, which also in Breath of the Wild are discussed upon, and say that if I remember correctly, I should have done the more research here, but I believe the luminous stones, they are, if you check the description in Breath of the Wild, they're sort of like referencing like lost souls or spirits or some sort of energy behind their luminous nature. So we see something similar to that in the first trailer, and then we see the hieroglyphs, or like, you know, these cave paintings of this battle that happened with Ganondorf. You see something that looks like Ganondorf on a horse with a trident, running into battle, and then we see this mummy creature that most of us believe full-heartedly is Ganondorf. It's not confirmed, but I mean, it's
I definitely
Ganondorf.
believe that.
Yeah, it's Ganondorf. I know some people will disagree in the comments, but it's Ganondorf. Anyways, we can debate that another day. Actually, that's a good video idea. Anyway, beyond that, probably Ganondorf, but it's not really even the main point here. There's a lot of evidence suggesting there's some sort of culture here that was perhaps tortured by whoever this mummy is. Doesn't have to be Ganondorf, but it is probably Ganondorf. Anyways, so you see this culture, like that. There's this already kind of this talk of it in the first trailer, or this allusion to it, right? But what's more interesting is, or perhaps, it's more interesting to me at least. It's when we look at like the Zonai swirls, then when you pay attention to the audio of the first trailer, there's a lot of debate of what was being said there. It sounds like whispers, and when it's put in reverse or slowed down, people are like, oh wait, that sounds like it's saying help us, something like that. Now that's
very scary.
Right. Now it can't be entirely confirmed that they're actually saying help us. We don't know that for a fact. I believe it's saying help us, but we don't know. But regardless, there are whispers there. It does sort of suggest that there's some sort of people that are chanting, or to some effect, it's something like that in that trailer. So we kind of have that already, right? We have these ruins that appear to be Zonai, and we have this allusion towards a war that this corpse led, and we seem to hear whispers throughout the trailer that I think we're saying help us. A lot of people agree, but there's definitely a debate there. It's not confirmed. In the second trailer, we see far more clearly this being, presumably Ganondorf, rising up, raising the castle into the air, and this leads to the events in the sky. We see Link clearly was hurt in the beginning of the game with the first trailer. He's wearing like this
arms destroyed.
Exactly. It's actually, there was a green hand that was in the first trailer, and there seems to be some sort of connection there between that green hand and Link's hand in the trailer where we finally see the sky gameplay. But there are ruins in the sky, so it's kind of more of an allusion to some sort of civilization in the sky. We don't know if that was the Zonai in the sky, but it seems like Link's hand might be related to it in some way, and that kind of connects it to all the talk of the first trailer where we saw all those Zonai ruins. Let's just skip that little snippet where we see Link with a Master Sword. It's cool, but it's not necessarily pertinent to this discussion, okay?
No.
The latest trailer where we finally got the title reveal for Tears of the Kingdom, there is so much of a motif of dragons all throughout. I believe it's all an allusion towards the Zonai. Now, to be fair, if you look at all the ruins of the Zonai, they aren't all depicting dragon heads. There's like some that look like birds and different things like that, different beasts. But when you pay attention to Tears of the Kingdom, there's a lot there that's alluding to what I believe are the Zona. You have, well, I mean, it's in the symbol of the game. There are these two dragon heads that are sort of circling to each other. It represents almost an Ouroboros, which is the idea of two snakes eating each other, which represents eternity. This isn't meant to, this isn't an allusion to Xenoblade, but they use that same sort of symbol in that game as well. So there's something going on that you have those dragons, but then there's even a door that Link opens up that has the dragons kissing each other, and there's runes that aren't Sheikah, that aren't Gerudo, that aren't Hylian in there. And we also see them in the earlier shots of the trailer where we see like this weird, like sort of, I'm calling her Bunny Zonai lady, the character with like the long ears. And we see like glyphs there again of a language you don't understand, right? So it's not Sheikah civilization, it's not Gerudo civilization, it's not Hylian civilization. It's depicting another civilization, an ancient civilization that we don't know about, which kind of further connects it to the whole theory of it being Zonai. And we see all of this dragon motif throughout the trailer. There's the glyphs of that. We even see evidence of dragons in the trailer. Like there's that one shot where it looks like we
see one.
Yeah. And it looks like, if it's not Farosh, it looks very similar to Farosh, like that style of dragon, the divine dragons, which in Breath of the Wild fly up into the sky through a weird cloud portal, which kind of seems to connect to what's going on in here in Tears of the Kingdom. So there's this huge motif here. It seems to connect to the Zonai, so that's kind of why people are really buying into the Zonai here. I'm sure there's other details I missed, but I feel like that kind of brings in a lot of the details that make people believe that this has to do with the Zonai.
Not sure what it would be if it wasn't the Zonai. It would just have to be like probably some kind of entirely new race, which is like the point.
Well, I mean, to play
I feel like
devil's
there's
advocate,
so many references to Zonai already in Breath of the Wild, and they don't really explain anything. It makes a lot of sense to follow that up in the sequel and actually like explain why all this stuff is here.
Here's another random thing. In the second trailer, we see an item that Link uses, and it's like a dragon head on a shield, and it breathes fire. So the dragon head is very much like the ruins from the Zonai, except it lights up and breathes fire, which obviously makes it more dragon-like, which just kind of feeds into this whole dragon motif we see all throughout the latest trailer, which feeds into the discussion that this is related to the Zonai, but also connects to maybe the divine dragons, right? So it's possible that it's not the Zonai, though, because again, we see a lot of dragon representation, but what about the other ruins?
Right.
Unless those are just depictions of actual different dragons that just have other heads that don't necessarily look like dragons, but maybe like other creatures.
Possible.
There's definitely some room for interpretation there, but to your point, Brandon, the one civilization that we know about that's depicted in Breath of the Wild that seems to be connected to everything we've seen so far is clearly the Zonai. Like, if it's not the Zonai, it's something else unknown. But to play devil's advocate, there is another possible civilization it could be related to. Maybe the Twilight. The Twilight also have been depicted with that weird sort of symbolic green energy. We've seen that before. I don't think it's the Twilight. I think they're going to keep that separate.
I don't think it fits with the sky motif. It's very not Twilight.
Yeah.
And like, weren't the people who were cast in the Twilight just like Hylians? Or just like random, just like normal people?
Well, they became their own people.
Right, after, but like originally they weren't like some kind of sky people, you know? Yeah. There's no room for them to, like, before they were Twilight, have been the Zonai, right?
Yeah.
I don't think so.
It's I don't know. There's this. I don't think. Yeah, I don't think they're the Zonai. Like, because at that point, we're talking about potential retcons Nintendo can do, right? Like, they could retcon where, because we didn't see evidence of like Twilight ruins in previous Zelda games, right? But they could retcon.
Also, didn't see evidence of a freaking sky area in the original Breath of the Wild in the same map.
No, but the story for Skyward Sword actually answers for that, though, because in Skyward Sword you cannot see Skyloft either. There's a cloud barrier, and when the dragons fly through this cloud, we see them go through a weird portal that's going through clouds in Breath of the Wild. It suggests that there is some sort of barrier, right? At the time we assume it's just the dragons that kind of like create this portal out of nothing, But with the context of both Skyward Sword that has this invisible cloud barrier and this barrier, we have to assume there is for Tears of the Kingdom, it all kind of makes sense, right? So it may have been a well-placed retcon, so it all fits, but it's at least explained for. Now, let's get back to just kind of extrapolating what this title means, right? We established that there is this culture, even if it's not the Zonai. There's very clearly an ancient civilization that had a heavy hand in the history of Hyrule, which is why we see all of these ruins high in the sky, right? And what's fascinating, though, is that we take a look at the first trailer, we see how Ganondorf, there's that depiction of Ganondorf riding into battle, right? And there's a depiction, and there's the whispers, and then there's those ruins, and then we see the ruins in the latest trailer, and we see more of this stuff on like some sort of wall depicting a history, and we even see again a depiction of a war going on. It could be connected to the same thing we saw in the first trailer, where there's a depiction of a war going on in the past. The difference is we saw one that looked like Ganondorf riding into battle with a horse and a trident, and the latest one we see what appears to be like a wave of malice with the bokoblins and stuff. There could be a history here of there being a war waged, maybe by Ganondorf as the leader, conquering this civilization, the Zonai. We assume Zonai, right? And so what's interesting about that is that's the case, that they were maybe subjugated or tortured or completely annihilated for them, maybe entirely, or maybe just for the most part, maybe there's like one survivor or something that helps Link, but something like that, where most of the race is taken out by Ganondorf. It makes sense then, because the title is called Tears of the Kingdom. It's sad because he wiped out an entire civilization, and the one civilization that's discussed that has so much evidence of existing throughout Breath of the Wild but isn't there is the Zonai. So it all kind of connects. Now, earlier we talked about how maybe there's like a multi-meaning with the title. It's also possible Tears of the Kingdom could also apply to Hyrule itself, because it is a post-apocalyptic world. There are bad things that have happened, and I think ultimately it comes down to Tears of the Kingdom. It may not just be one kingdom. What if it's several kingdoms? What if at first they let's think it's a Zonai, but it turns out it's the Zonai, it's the Gerudo, it's the Hylians, it's the Gorons, it's the Zoras, the Rito. Maybe they throw in another civilization there, like the Koroks, right? And then there's these 7 different races, and you have to collect a special tier from each one. The 7 tiers that are depicted in the sort of wall paintings or hieroglyphs. They look like tiers to me. You know what I'm talking about? Like those rings.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, are you on this? I'm kind of like
those are tiers.
I'm just like going on a giant like rant here. Feel free to jump in. Like, do you kind of agree with what I'm saying though, or do you kind of have slightly different thoughts on what this could be?
One thing I'm wondering is, like, it seems if we see this bunny Zonai character, doing some kind of hand thing with somebody who looks like Zelda or some kind of Hylian princess.
Or a Zonai princess.
That's possible. It could be that the bunny is a completely different race and that that's a Zonai. However, what I'm curious about is why, if it is a Hylian and the Zonai working together, why is it that only Hylians survived? Why did the Zonai get wiped out, but the other race that was working with them, if it is the Hylians, obviously did not?
Well, I mean, okay, that's an interesting idea, but let's think about this. If we fit in my idea how maybe Tears of the Kingdom have to do with the different tiers that represent each race that was in some way, tortured or subjugated by Ganondorf over time. They've all suffered to some capacity, right?
Right.
The Zora have suffered, the Gerudo have suffered, the Sheikah have suffered. Like, there aren't that many Sheikah left either. No. So let's not pretend like, the Sheikah are booming while the Zonai are entirely extinct. Like, no, the Sheikah aren't too far off either. Like, if Calamity Ganon decided to like just explode on Kakariko Village, the Sheikah would be no more once all the monks disappear, right? So Like, I'm just saying that it's not like they're in great shape either. Like, a lot of Hyrule is not in amazing shape. The population's pretty small. There's been a lot of death. Most towns are just completely destroyed. So, I don't know. I don't think it's necessarily just a Zonai, but to your point though, something did happen that entirely annihilated the Zonai, while the others were not. And I actually have an idea on that.
Yeah.
So, and this kind of goes back to how I actually feel like some theories we had pointed towards this title, even though we didn't predict specifically the title, but the idea behind when I've come up with some names was similar. So when I'll have to pull up a video, maybe I'll pull up a clip and I'll kind of insert it here after the fact. But if I remember correctly from a video I've made a little while back, I had a video where I kind of tried to predict the title and I tried to analyze what we knew so far and kind of see where they might be going with it. And I think I said something to the effect of Whispers of the Zonai, or like the lost people. It's basically something to the effect of something that kind of speaks to the idea, I should say, of a people that were hurt and lost, and that's what this game is about. And I think that's what Tears of the Kingdom is really speaking on. Tears of the Kingdom. Kingdom is speaking on a kingdom of some people, right? And Tears is a sadness, right? Now, there obviously could be more to it than just that, but I think there's a little bit of a connection there.
You know what? I want to play devil's advocate on the wording of kingdom itself. What do you consider a kingdom? Obviously, Hyrule, it's got a queen, it's got a king, princesses. That's a kingdom.
Sure.
Would you consider other things a kingdom? The Zonai, according to like the barbarian armor, were kind of barbarous tribe, in the Hylian's eyes at least. So were they even a kingdom, or were they more like a less civilized band of people?
Okay. Well, I think it comes down to this. Do they have a king?
Who knows?
If they have a king,
they
have
that
a kingdom.
bunny person.
I mean, are they really so uncivilized? Look at all of the structures they created. They had the labyrinths, they had the ruins, and maybe
I put the quotation marks.
Right. Well, I mean, I don't know. I feel like they probably are a kingdom. But you also, maybe you could consider all 7 races to be the kingdom as a whole, maybe?
Right.
Or maybe 7 kingdoms become one giant kingdom. There's a unity there. But
that could be it. Like it's a collective kingdom.
Yeah.
It's an all-encompassing kingdom. Because I mean, like when I think of like Hyrule Kingdom, like I don't think of just the Hylians, right? Like you kind of think of other races that live in Hyrule as well as being part of the kingdom.
And I actually think that supports the idea I had earlier, right? Like maybe at first we think of it as just a Zonai, but actually it's more about all 7 races coming together. And I'm saying 7. I mean, what do we have in Breath of the Wild? We have the Hylians, we have the Sheikah, we have the Gerudo, the Zora, and the Rito.
6.
And the Gorons.
Did you say that one already?
No, wait, no, let's math this. Okay, so that's 6. Rito,
6 or 7 or something.
Rito, Zora, Gorons, Gerudo. That's 4. Count the Hylians, that's 5. If you count the Sheikah, which there's a little bit of a blend there, because some Sheikah...
You got the Yi as well.
Yeah, but they work for Ganon, so I think they're separate.
Yeah.
They're also used to be Sheikah. It's like Sheikah branched off. But that's 6. Maybe you could count the Koroks, but they are kind of like a smaller civilization. They're of the Deku tree, so maybe not. And then there's a Zonai. Of course, this could just be an incorrect theory, where there's actually more than just 7 different races. So, no.
They could totally bring in like entirely new ones for the sequel as well.
Yeah, the 7 tiers could just apply to the sages, because there were 7 stages. But what's interesting though is that it could still be both. Like there could be a sage that represents an entire tribe, as they tend to do. So we go to Ocarina of Time, right? You had one sage that was there was a Gerudo. So there was a Gerudo sage, a Goron sage, a Zora sage. There was I guess
There
you
was
could
a
say
Kokiri sage.
there was a Kokiri sage and there was a Sheikah sage for Impa, right? For Kakariko Village. So that's 5. And then there's Rauru from the Light Temple, and then there's also Zelda. So you could say Rauru's a Hylian, and so is Zelda, but Zelda is like the princess, right? She's maybe like she's like the 7th sage, right? She's kind of like the master sage of all the sages. But there were at least 6 races represented by the sages. So it's the idea that the sages could also represent 7 different races of the kingdom, or 6, isn't really kind of that crazy. But there's another interesting thing to consider here, because we see the 7, we're calling them tiers, right? But there is that other shot that shows Bunny Zonai and Zonai Zelda, or some ancient princess, right? Holding hands together, and we see 2 tiers in a giant circle. So I have a hard time even kind of making out what that may mean. What are the implications of that? It could be actually, it may not even be as crazy. It may not be actually falling with what we're saying. It may speak to the idea of kingdoms working together, or races coming together here. It's just that union of 2 different races.
Right. It is odd that there's 7 though. It's like it's not an equal or not an even number. It's like if you wanted to, like, if they each had a match, like one would just be alone, right? Kind of weird.
But maybe there's something there. Maybe there's 7 dungeons in Tears of the Kingdom,
nice.
one for each tier, and they're actually each located in the different regions, right? So one is in the Hebrew region, which would be where the Reed are, which is also where that giant tornado is, right? One could be inside Death Mountain, which we actually didn't get to go inside Death Mountain. We would just dive from the lava. And we see the Malice just erupting from there. So that would be for the Goron one, right? Obviously, there's something going on with Hyrule Castle. Maybe that counts as an eighth like dungeon, or maybe it's like that's where we get the 7th tier, and that's where Zelda is, because she's the final sage. That's a possibility. But then obviously if the Zonai are one, maybe there's one for the Zonai, and then maybe there could be an underwater temple from the Zora, right? And then obviously one for the Gerudo. Maybe it's related to where Arbiter's Grounds is, or where
there's one in the sky, so that one would be like the Zonai one.
Yeah, there's like that giant building that's almost like like an upside down pyramid almost.
Ever since the 2nd trailer,
it's huge. Like, what is in there? Maybe it's a giant dungeon, So, I mean, I think there could be something to this, but I mean, ultimately, I think the game. I like so, but let's get to the title for a second, because we're talking about like story implications here, right? But typically, when it comes to Zelda titles, yes, the title has something to say about the story, but it also has something to say about the gameplay, right? Let's think about that for a second. Ocarina of Time, yes, it speaks to the story, the idea of jumping between times, but that's also a huge gameplay component. Think like doing things between 2 different timelines. There's a huge gameplay element there. In Majora's Mask, same deal. There is this huge timeline, or time mechanic, because you're going back 3 days. You have to beat the game in 3 days, or go back in time, accomplish something. So there's that time mechanic, but it's also about the masks, because it's called Majora's Mask.
It's a huge part of the game is the masks.
Yeah. And then Wind Waker, well, that tool is applying to
control the seas.
The winds, which allowed you to travel the seas. And, you are called the hero of the winds, and it's all about sea traversal, right? Like, so that makes sense there. Twilight Princess is maybe one that it's a little bit more just story focused.
That one's very abstract in general.
Yeah, but there's definitely a moodiness to the game, and it does also relate to Wolf Link, which is a big mechanic in the game too. You could like if there's like that weird hook that Twilight Princess has, it is the whole Wolf Midna gameplay, right?
It refers to Zelda, it refers to Midna, it refers to Link.
Yeah.
It refers to a lot of things.
Yeah, it does. So you have those.
A whole race of people.
Yeah, you have those. And then Skyward Sword, I think, is pretty obvious, because
Yeah.
there's the whole Sky gameplay and Skyward Sword. You literally raise the sword up, which sort of
Skyward Strike.
the Skyward Strike. It's a mention towards the motion gameplay and all of that. Like that, I think that one's pretty easy. Breath of the Wild is a very abstract name, but it speaks towards the open air style of the game, like that whole openness that you explore, this wild world that you can explore.
It also kind of hints to like just a type of gameplay it is. It's like this wild like exploration, just like it's just an untamed world where physics and things can happen that typically can't happen in most open world games. Kind of feel like it hints to that as well. It's kind of like a all-encompassing. It's just a great title.
Yeah, it is a great title. But then let's take a look at Tears of the Kingdom. I feel like we kind of spoke into like some story implications there, right? But what about gameplay? Well, I think it kind of, just think about we were just talking. I was just talking about how there could be like maybe dungeon locations that could be representing the different races potentially. Well, I mean, the tiers could also kind of speak to that to an extent, because, well, there's the 7 different dungeons and there's something going on with them that kind of may impact how you sort of go about exploring the game. But then also, when we take a look at the second trailer, there is this weird thing they show of a tier coming from a puddle that seems to sort of suggest you going up into the sky. So it could be the case that tiers could also be somehow related to the gameplay mechanic, and it's what gives you this ability to go farther into the air than ever before, expanding upon the open airness from Breath of the Wild even more.
Maybe that you get each of the tiers unlocks a new ability on which you hold on that weird thing on Link's side.
An interesting point, because but the thing is, it looks like it can hold up to 8 though.
That is true.
But that's all. But also to your let's hold on a second though. Like, we're assuming that there's only 7 tiers because of that one shot, but maybe there are 8. We don't know, or maybe it's not even. They're not even necessarily that related in terms of quantity. It could just be like something that you use that holds like your magic or some sort of energy that applies to different mechanics. But it could still be relating to the tiers. Maybe every time you get a tier, you do get some sort of power up. Whenever you beat a dungeon in Breath of the Wild, you got a power up. So,
right. Well, it'll be very different from Breath of the Wild in terms of like. In Breath of the Wild, you had all of your Sheikah abilities on your Sheikah slate, like right away. As soon as you got off the plateau, you didn't really gain any super new abilities. Like, you got ones from the dungeons, but they were mostly like just helpful. And they didn't change the game.
Yeah, they wouldn't help you. I mean, they would help you progress, but there was always another way around it. You didn't need those powers to complete everything. Right. It just made it easier.
But that also meant that all the dungeons had to be very generic, or not generic, but very, they all kind of felt the same. Like, the dungeons didn't feel too much different from like the
shrines.
Yeah, from the shrines. Like, they just kind of felt like bigger, more complex shrines. It would be interesting if each of these powers is like, these dungeons are, you know, like in the old games, they're kind of built around and instead of an item, a specific power, which also allows you to traverse the world more. I think that would be cool, because while it was fun to be able to go everywhere anytime and be able to do anything in Breath of the Wild, we've kind of explored this world already. So there are some things where it'd be interesting, I think, to just let us find something and not be able to do it yet, and need to go to a dungeon to get a specific ability. I think that would be fine for this one. There might be some base abilities that we have, perhaps. Like at the beginning. We might get some new ones. I don't know.
But yeah, I mean, do you envision any other way Tears of the Kingdom could or sort of hint at the gameplay beyond that?
It might hint at the fact that civilization might be a bit more prevalent.
Because, I mean, if it goes back to maybe, you know, collecting these tiers that represent different kingdoms, maybe there is something to that idea, right? Like, maybe you want to help restore these different civilizations. And that could also go to this site, like it's been long sort of speculated or theorized, or rather more like hoped, I think is probably the best word, hoped that Nintendo would eventually add a way for us to restore the civilizations in the sequel to Breath of the Wild.
Yeah, we were really hoping for the DLC initially to be like a huge Terry Town kind of quest.
Well, yeah, it was like overly ambitious of us compared to what we got, at least.
We didn't know at the time they were going to do a sequel, though.
Yeah. I would also say that, like, you look at what we got for the DLC for Breath of the Wild, and when you compare it to some, like, DLC we have gotten from other games, it's pretty lackluster by comparison. Like, it's not that it was bad, but
Nintendo's gone a lot better at DLC as of late.
I mean, Nintendo still started getting the hang of DLC back in 2017, and I think now they were like, okay, if we're gonna have DLC, it needs to be like an actual, like,
their first DLC ever for a single player game.
Yeah, it was, wasn't it? Trying to think about it. I think so.
I think the only DLC they had before that was for Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. Or just Mario Kart 8.
That's Splatoon had free DLC.
Yeah. Splatoon had free DLC.
Yeah, it is interesting though, because this generation's Nintendo's really gotten used to doing paid DLC. Yeah, so that it wasn't very early on for them.
Back then.
Yeah. But kind of, you know, I feel like we've kind of touched on some things here, and you know, I guess to summarize how I feel about it, and maybe you can tell me what you think. Maybe we can have a little bit more discussion on that. But ultimately, I feel that the name sort of represents different civilizations, especially the Zonai, and it's kind of, from a story perspective, it's kind of like Link avenging these different civilizations again and stopping Ganondorf for good, because we look at the depiction of this war that was waged in both the first and recent trailer. I think that's a suggestion towards a race being wiped out, hence the sadness, hence the tears of death, right? And it's going to be about stopping Ganondorf, avenging these people, hence the whole theming of Tears of the Kingdom. And this may go beyond the Zonai, because we do see those 7 different tiers. Maybe it's like that's where you get a sage, and each sage represents a different kingdom that has suffered in some way, shape, or form.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know if you have any different thoughts than that.
My thoughts is slightly different. I think it's more focused on the Zonai. I think it's more of a 2-fold thing than a 7-fold idea. I think it's mostly focused on the Zonai and Hyrule. And I do think that the mural is referencing a time when the Zonai and Hylians came together, and it's going to be discussing that. I also feel that I kind of hope that they make a reference to Hylia itself doing something that wasn't amazing, like slighting the Zonai in some way, and that's actually why they didn't survive, in part due to Hylia. I kind of feel like they might go there. I mean, this is supposed to be the darkest Zelda yet, so yeah, I wouldn't put it past Nintendo to slip at least maybe not something super terrible, but like something that attributed to the Zonais going extinct, either from negligence or straight up just disregard. Because the Hylians do regard these people as barbarians. Like, they describe them. That's not typically a good way to describe people.
Sure. A couple thoughts that come to mind. I know that you think it may be more focused on maybe just Hyrule and the Zonai, and that may be a heavy story focus there. But I think you kind of also supported my argument, though, because you look at that shot where you see Bunny Zonai Lady, maybe, and maybe Zelda in that shot where there's the 2 tiers coming together and they're holding hands. That suggests 2 different kingdoms coming together, right? And if each tier is representing each kingdom coming together, when we see that shot of the 7, it does also imply that each tier represents each kingdom. So I totally agree with you that the main focus is, if there are going to be like 2, like, if I think it's going to be about the Zonai and their relationship to Hyrule. Like, I do agree with that. I don't disagree with that. But I do think that the other kingdoms or races, depending on how that ends up being interpreted, I think they're going to be related. Maybe.
I kind of have a feeling that the tiers might be, like, the tiers themselves might be, I don't know. Because we only see the 2 tiers come together, right?
Yeah.
Just those 2. above the Hylians, and the other ones, whether there's 7 or however many of them, they're not there. Like, there's no point where we see artwork. Is there a point? I think there's one point actually where we see all 7 of them come together, but we don't see anybody else but the Zonai in that shot. There's no other races. There's never a point where we see tiers being represented as another race other than Zonai.
True.
Other than perhaps the part where there's 2 above them connecting, but we have no idea if that actually represents a tier from Hyrule and a tier from Zonai. Because the tiers all seem to come from the Zonai. And to finish the point, on the shield that Link has on his back in the second and third trailer that has the tier, or the eye with the tiers, that seems to have, I'm not sure if that's 7.
Ooh, 7 tiers?
Count. It might be 7 tiers.
It might be 7. It might very well be.
It's either 7 or close to 7.
Yeah.
But either way, it seems to all be coming from the Zonai symbol, right? All encapsulates. So all the times we see the tiers, it always seems to be with the Zonai, except one time where it might maybe also represent Hylia. So we never really see the tiers representing any other races.
I think that's a valid counter argument. I think it's a good one, actually. So there you go, you win. Like,
I don't know if I win, but it's definitely something to consider.
Yeah, it's absolutely something to consider. I think you're right about it being 7 tiers. I would have to go back and check, but think there could be something there. I'll probably post the image in the edit here, and then you guys can sort of see it and decide for yourself. But yeah, I think that makes sense. I still think that each tier could be collected in a different area that's related to a different race.
That is possible.
But that doesn't mean the Zonai won't have their influence in different parts of the world. So, I think it could be both. It doesn't have to be one or the other. That's a whole other thing to consider here, right? So there's definitely a lot there, but ultimately I think it's kind of, when you think about the title, it's about people who have suffered, right? And
it's a complex title. I think the meaning behind it is not something black and white. There's no one meaning. I think Nintendo has a variety, like with Breath of the Wild, they have a variety of meanings. Yeah. I mean, with all their other Zelda titles,
I do have
they're very good at picking something that kind of encapsulates the major focus of the game in many different aspects.
Yeah, I do actually have a theory to close things out. I've touched on this before, but it kind of may answer to why the Zonai were eliminated.
Okay.
So you gotta keep in mind that Ganondorf gave up on a physical form and assumed the identity of Calamity Ganon leading up to the events of Breath of the Wild, right? Calamity Ganon started being a generational attack. Which means that the source of it all being Ganondorf, this corpse has been around for a very long time, so many generations could occur where the Calamity Ganon comes out and attacks, right? But what's important here is it suggests there's a long history of Ganondorf failing to conquer Hyrule and likely failing because of the hero. So, what's fascinating about this is that the hero typically represents the Triforce of Courage. Right? And in Breath of the Wild, the Triforce is missing until the very end with Zelda, and it's just the entire Triforce. It's not divided into the 3 different crests as it usually is.
And it doesn't feel like they really understand what the Triforce is or how it works. She just knows it as a power from the gods that she gets to defeat Ganon.
But hear me out here. Maybe the reason Link doesn't have the Triforce of Courage is because the Triforce of Courage comes from the Zonai. And they were eliminated. And maybe previous heroes came from the Zonai. Because there is even that shot of a wild-looking version of the hero. And people have debated with red hair. Yeah, so maybe once upon a time the Zonai were the ones that bred the hero, It's just a thought there, but I think ultimately
possible.
It could explain why maybe the Zonai were eliminated, because it's kind of we know that Ganondorf would be born from the Gerudo, right? Well, there's some debate there actually, but point is, it could have been the case that Gandalf knew that maybe the Triforce of Courage could come from the Zonai, and he eliminated them to stop the hero from coming at him, right? Or they may have been related, at least maybe stopping the Triforce of Courage, you know what I mean? And you look at the Yiga, who are red, they may represent, you know, the Triforce of Power, and then you have the Sheikah, who Zelda is closely tied to, that are blue, that may represent the Triforce of Wisdom. So I still think that theory I've had would kind of hold up here, and it may explain actually why the Zonai were wiped out. Gandalf may have focused on them because they were somehow tied to the Triforce of Courage, which would help the hero stop Link stop Gandalf.
Fair, because there's no reason like that the hero has to be Hylian, is there? I don't think so. It just happens to be like what it is so far. Like in Skyward Sword, is there ever a reason like actually defined why he's Hylian other than just?
Oh, isn't he from Skyloft?
It just is.
He's not.
He's from Skyloft.
Yeah, which I don't.
I'm just saying, like, is his descendant? Is it like his descendants? Do they have to be Hylians though?
I don't know. I mean, you look at
and.
I don't know, because then you also look at Wind
like,
Waker Link, right? Like, is Wind Waker Link a Hylian? I don't know.
Like,
it doesn't even, like, that's not even like a thing anymore. Hyrule's gone.
Yeah, Hyrule's just done.
Yeah.
And then you got the fact that, what if the Hylians aren't the only race that came from Skyloft? Could have been others. The Zonai could have been another one.
Yeah. I mean, we do know about the, what are they called? The Yoka? There's like these chicken people from Twilight Princess. That's a whole other race.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I think that there could be a relation, at the very least. I don't know if that's maybe why Gandalf eliminated the Zonai, but I think there's going to be a big element of Link restoring the Master Sword in some way, which also could be tied to him further proving himself as the hero, maybe finally obtaining the Triforce of Courage. Since now there's actually Ganondorf and not just this force of nature, there's more reason to have this personality, this individual, which likely will raise the question of him having the Triforce of Power, which then raises the question of why Link doesn't have the Triforce of Courage, and then also, alongside of that, Zelda with her Triforce of Wisdom, right? Which she loses her powers at the end of Breath of the Wild. So that's a whole other question mark that needs to be answered at some point in this sequel, Tears of the Kingdom. So there's honestly like a lot. There's a lot.
So much.
Yeah. But that's kind of like, I would say, like some ideas we sort of take from what we see from Tears of the Kingdom so far. But I think that's all for now. Do you have any final thoughts, Brandon, or do you think we kind of covered it for the time being? Because there's definitely more angles we can cover here.
I think at this point, I think it's probably the Zonai in Hyrule, but at this point, we just gotta wait for more context. We gotta wait for that next trailer, and I feel like when we get that context, we're gonna see more of the spoilers, maybe, that Nintendo was talking about. Because I feel like without the context, it's not super spoilery. Though we got a lot of discussion that may or may not be true, so who knows?
Yeah, I mean, it's all speculation at this point. Yeah, we'll see, but I'll say, like, I mean, come on, would they really give us a title that spoils so much of the game that, like, you don't even need to play it? Like,
Right.
like, you're not gonna, like, imagine if Star Wars is like the betrayal of your father or something.
Yeah. The second one's just called Luke, I Am Your Father.
Yeah. One random little thing I want to point out, though, that I was right on. I'm sure other people agreed with me, but they kept the of the naming. They didn't use breath, they didn't use wild, but I always felt they would use of the, and they did. Tears of the Kingdom. So just want to do a little victory lap there. But
there you go.
Yeah.
That's fair.
Yeah. Anyways, guys, that's all for now. If you could like the video, it'd be super appreciated. Check out Brandon. He has a Twitter page. So, he's on the channel. He's my co-host. So, yeah. But we'll see you later. Take care.
Bye, guys.